Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace Forum. We're just getting started today on Saturday. There's been a lot of events going on. In fact, I missed an event today, which was the Greenfield Peace Awards at the Portland for the Physicians for Social Responsibility was hosting at the First Unitarian Church. And VFP was also a co-sponsor of that, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it, but you know, you have conflicts, so I have to do what I have to do. And so also, you know, I mean, last time we had some clips of videos and some pictures from my tour in Viet Nam. When it was 18 days in Viet Nam. That was for the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive and the My Lai massacre. It was an incredible trip. I was hoping to have some more videos for you today, but just couldn't find it on my thumb drive. So I have two guests here, which I think is going to be plenty of information that we need to talk about. And one of the things that was important is Olivia Katbi Smith is the co-director of Democratic Socialists of Oregon, right?
Of Portland.
Of Portland,
yeah.
Of Portland. And Olivia and I were, Saturday, were at the demonstration that she helped organize with a number of people from a coalition of a number of groups that came, most of them young people, which was good to see. And this was to oppose the USS Portland. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what brought it about?
Sure. So the USS Portland is a $1.6 billion ship that was being commissioned, named after our city. Our mayor, Ted Wheeler, and our governor, Kate Brown, were both speaking at the commissioning ceremony. And at a time when Trump is clearly trying to escalate military action in Syria, we felt it imperative to protest the naming of a warship after our city. So we had about 100 people there, which was pretty good, and we had speakers from all different kinds of organizations, and we did a march over to the commissioning ceremony. And I'm told that we were able to be heard from the commissioning ceremony, which is great.
Wow, that is great.
Yeah.
Now, I just wanted to say, I noticed that you had also, kind of your history here a little bit, you had also worked for IRCO.
Yes.
You can see I'm wearing my immigration shirt. I used to have friends that worked for the IRCO.
Oh, cool.
From Somalia, you know.
Oh, cool.
And so for many years, IRCO was a part of my life when I was at Portland State in the 1990s.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad was an immigrant from Jordan, and his family is Syrian, and my grandmother still lives in Syria. So, like, I've always kind of been interested in working with immigrants and refugees, but especially during when the Syrian refugee crisis kind of has been getting a lot of media attention. I really started following it. I wanted to, do it as a career.
Right. So I one of the things that it was interesting when you asked me to speak, which I was glad that people are coming to Veterans for Peace and asking us to be a part of something, because if you can just explain a little bit of what a lot of people said, they seem to recognize that the war is draining almost all the social services as we go along. Totally.
I mean, we spend billions and billions of dollars on war. Like I said, that ship alone cost $1.6 billion. The missiles that were fired last weekend at Syria alone cost $119 million. And just think about what we could do with all of the money we're spending on military activities around the globe, on taking care of people here at home. I mean, we could provide universal health care, universal education, public housing. We could do so many things with that money, but instead, we're killing people abroad.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said you were from Georgia?
No, my dad is from Jordan.
Oh, Georgia, okay.
Yeah.
And
the country.
Tell us a little bit about your history and how you got involved in this kind of politics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty new to socialism in general, but I think growing up, like in an Arab family, I grew up in rural Ohio, and I was in 4th grade when 9/11 happened, so I kind of always felt that, like, I knew that politics were important, and I knew that politics kind of made me an outlier compared to the people that I grew up with. I think that, you know, the experience of growing up Arab kind of pushed me left. Someone recently told me you can tell a lot about a person's politics by asking them how they feel about Palestine, which is so true. I mean, it's not a popular or mainstream position to, you know, stand up for Arabs or Muslims. But in terms of socialism, I think I really kind of came to it through Bernie Sanders when, you know, he was saying all these policies that just made so much sense to me. And he was also saying that he was a democratic socialist. So I checked out DSA after Bernie's campaign, and DSA is really where I learned so much more about, you know, socialism and capitalism and how all of our struggles are connected. So yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things that led me here.
Well, there are other socialist organizations. How come that?
There are, yeah. The good thing about DSA is that it's a big tent organization, meaning, you know, we don't have a party line, we don't have like literature you have to read, we don't have barriers to entry. We want it, you know, we want to build a movement, so we want it to be accessible to everyone. We want everyone to be able to be involved. And so we have people who have been in this movement for decades, and we have people who have never been politically active before. We have people who are communists. We have people who are, you know, very involved in the Democratic Party. We have a whole range of different people with different viewpoints, and that's one of the great things about DSA. And I think that's why our organization has kind of exploded compared to these other smaller organizations.
Plus, there's more of a, I would say, young people that are coming out against issues like racism and xenophobia, the Me Too movement, et cetera, has really inspired a lot of young people. Plus the March for Our Lives, the young people getting out and speaking, which gave me a lot of hope, because you know, after doing this for so many years, you start going, is anybody going to get it? You know, and how long can I keep going? You know.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like young people are in a position now where they don't really have a choice. You know, they see the future is bleak, and especially after Trump got elected, so many people are like, okay, we have to do something now. You know, and Trump didn't, you know, appear in a vacuum. Trump is a symptom of the disease of neoliberalism, which has led to these policies that have totally alienated everyone. But I think Trump is like the final manifestation where people are like, enough is enough. You know, where can I get involved? How can I get involved? And DSA has been the vehicle for that. So,
you know, I think I sent you a little email about the possibility. What do you think about right now Trump's kind of waving the flag about what's happening in Korea? You know, as though Korea, this peace movement, is because of his bullying. You know, and I don't, you know, I have a real problem with the idea that he's taking credit for that. But what do you see as sort of analysis of what did happen and what is happening?
I mean, I'm not super informed about Korea, but I think it's pretty clear that any success that happens in the peace movement there is despite Trump, not because of him. You know, I mean, I see it kind of similar to how the conflict in Israel and Palestine, when they talk about the peace process, they laud the United States, or the United States lauds itself rather, as this you know, necessary arbiter of peace, this like paternalistic third party. The only way you're going to get peace is if the United States is the one brokering it, and that's absolutely not true. The truth is that the United States' involvement has made things exponentially worse, and I think that probably applies to what's happening in Korea as well.
Betsy, you know, you can jump in here.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, and I also haven't followed what's happening with Korea, but it just seems like North and South Korea decided that enough was enough. And whether Trump's posturing and threatening had anything to do with that, who knows? But it was not the critical piece from them moving forward in any way.
For me, I've been involved with the Jeju Island in off the it's a Korean province, a little island off there, and they've been demonstrating against the Deepwater Naval Base. The South Korean Army has put their because of the push of the U.S. to want another harbor to put their warships. Now we're talking about warships, you know. That's what I was thinking about when we were there. Is this just another one of those warships to be placed out there in the Asian pivot or in the Middle East somewhere to threaten some group of country to do our bidding? And the other is there's been reports. They said they were never going to have a nuclear submarine, but there have been reports that there was one docked there. And even though they, for 8 years, day after day after day, they were there. And I went in 2015 and joined in solidarity with the movement there. We would sit out, and they had these chairs in front of the gate of this construction site for this naval base. And this is on sacred land. Again, indigenous peoples of the island, the sacred land to them, this destruction of it, carving up the land, the water, the coral, all of this stuff. Well, they tried day after day, and they held it up, made it, it cost them dearly to put this, to finally finish it. And they finished it in February, I think it was 2016. And but that didn't stop the protests. The protests continue, as they do today, to close it down, to shut it down, and to turn it, they say, turn it into a university for marine biology, turn it into anything but this, because they've declared their island an island of peace. And in World War, at the end of the Korean War, their island, there is what they have, what they call the April, I think it's the April 3rd or April 4th massacre that took place, April 3rd, I believe, a massacre in Jeju Island, which, you know, the numbers are 10,000 to 20, 30,000 were massacred. And this was just as the new president had just been appointed, the U.S. government was still in charge militarily, and they basically said, you know, they're all communists. Again, another reason just to slaughter people. And so that, they have a memorial there, which actually has the names of all the people there that were killed. They have it's called a Peace Museum. Incredible place to go and learn the history of what happened and how Korea itself basically colonized their island, and all they want it to be is separate and at peace. There were no threats to anybody, but right now they say they want to call their island an island of peace. So does Okinawa, and they want to bring even the Philippines and others. They want to bring them together so they don't become the stepping stones for a next war. And when I think about that ship in our name, while I'm here trying to fight against what's happening there. Also, my other colleagues from Veterans for Peace, 3 of them, were in Okinawa on the same days that we were doing this, protesting a Marine Corps base that they're building on. They're trying to build on this in Honoko, this Aurora Bay, which is again another natural habitat that has what they call dugons, which are kind of manatees. There's only a couple of them left there, and plus other species and the coral. So. Right now, and then they just found out that the bottom of this thing is milky, and that they're going to be dumping all this sand and rock in there, and it's still questionable whether it can really withstand it, you know. So they've been trying to stop it and have an environmental impact. The governor, Onaga, who actually a couple of times had stopped the license for the construction company to continue building a base, and then the government of Japan ordered that to be. They countersued. He countersued him again, and they've been going back and forth. And in the last elections, they had a mayor in one little town in which the Abe government actually put a lot of money into his campaign to put in somebody who supported the base being built. And so this is just, there's 32 bases on Okinawa already.
Yeah. I was going to say that I don't think most of the American public has any idea how many bases we have all over Asia, or even all over the world.
There's over 800 bases throughout the world. Some will say 1,000, depending on how many. I think that's if you include the U.S. But you know, there are. When you think about it, they are strategically planned. A lot of them are strategically planned for trade routes and or to threaten other countries to be ready. I mean, we just had in Nicaragua. I don't know if anybody saw that. There was all of a sudden came out in the news that the Nicaraguan government was firing on peaceful protesters. Right? I'm going, what? This just doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, I have Brian Wilson, who lives down there. He's a veteran who lost his legs.
I didn't know he was down there.
He's living down there, so I asked him for his analysis. And then there was a professor who chimed in and started saying, well, look, this is what has happened in Nicaragua. We're talking about a socialist government, right? It's not perfect. It has its problems. In fact, you know, Camilo Mejia, who was a veteran, Iraq War veteran, who became a refusenik basically, and refused to go back and serve in Iraq, ended up going to prison, wrote a book about his experience. He was in, I think, for a year, maybe a little longer. His parents were the revolutionaries in Nicaragua, but they don't have a great love for Daniel Ortega, but he's better than anything they've had before. And that's the way they look at it, you know. And then they were saying that what happened is the IMF basically said they wanted to do austerity programs against Nicaragua, and so they said we want you to increase the retirement age to 65. It's at 60 right now, and we want you to decrease their benefits. And the government basically refused and decided that they were going to increase the retirement payment and keep the age the same and tax the rich. The businesses called out this demonstration. So all of a sudden you had people out there, and in the mix of it you have these provocateurs began shooting at the police. And sure, police shot back in some cases, but the violence started with these demonstrators. And I think that's something people need to know and understand. There's a history of what's going on. Imagine calling people out because you were giving benefits to the general population that has lived under dictatorships for many years, and all of a sudden, you know, there's a revolutionary government that's still trying to grow and still trying to be a safe place. And what they really worry about is what's happening in El Salvador and Honduras. Is gang violence and drug violence is growing. We're seeing those refugees coming to our border, you know, and
they're not allowed in.
And they're not allowed in, and they're basically sending them back. And Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton said, "Got to send those kids back and teach those parents a lesson." You know, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that we wanted to call attention to with the warship protest too. Is like. Ted Wheeler and Kate Brown, you know, they call themselves members of the resistance, but what are they resisting? You know, they are complicit in the military-industrial complex. It was really funny to see Ted Wheeler's speech up there because I could tell he was scared. He knew he was getting heat because he stressed, you know, this ship is going to do humanitarian work. It's going to help people in crisis. And then, you know, all the military officials that were speaking after him just bragged about how lethal the ship was, while Kate Brown stood up there and, you know, was saying straight up right-wing rhetoric like freedom isn't free. This is a Democrat saying this stuff. Freedom isn't free. She said, you know, we have to protect our interests in this great time of uncertainty. You know, it's literally beating the drums of war. So I am embarrassed for them that they think that they're members of the resistance when they are supporting this warship, supporting the military-industrial complex that's going to go destroy people's livelihoods, destroy their countries. They can't turn around and say, you know, we're a sanctuary city, we're a sanctuary state. That's not how it works.
Well, I was a part of the sanctuary movement in the 1980s and worked on sanctuary cities across the nation. You know, I was with a number of different groups, but we and I had taken in a couple of refugees in my home, one from Guatemala, one from El Salvador, and for a short period of time. But these are, and then there's the Underground Railroad, people going to Canada. I mean, these things continue today, and they're necessary. But I'm wondering how many people have the courage to stand up with all the surveillance that we have nowadays, and the prosecution of people, the throwing of separating families and children and putting them in prison camps, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, when you talked about that, it is so much of a Hillary Clinton corporate Democratic. We can only win our next election if we out-Republican, out-right-wing the Republicans. What a bunch of crock.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's interesting that in Oregon, in Portland, there's this veneer of pseudo-progressive on top of that.
Yes.
As opposed to a straight-ahead corporate right-wing Democrat. So it is a very odd thing.
It is. I mean, it is capitalism. I mean, people don't want to give up the little things that they have, and they're just really being thrown pieces of meat, but they don't want to lose that, and they're scared. People are scared. I don't know. I wanted to go back to the idea of what's going on in Korea, this peace thing, because this is a profound movement, that this would happen before they met with Trump, right? Which I think is really important. And we have to go back to the idea that the previous president, Park, was the daughter of a fascist, one of the early fascist leaders of the country. She herself was pretty much a fascist right-wing hawk, and the people protested because of corruption, and she's spending a number of years in jail because of it. That opened the door for Moon to be elected, and he was progressive from the beginning, saying that we needed to bring the two countries together. So millions of people demonstrating in the streets, that's why they're moving closer, and that's what we have to constantly let people know. It's that solidarity and that truth that needs to be told. Somebody said, I will say, I wrote something about, if it means that the peace will continue, then I won't have too much of a problem with Trump saving face in some sense, And then somebody said, well, who cares who takes credit? And then I said, well, it's very important to know who takes credit. Because if Trump takes credit and people that enters the lexicon of our language, it means that bullies and gunboat diplomacy rules the day. And that's not what happened. It took activists, peace activists, to work towards this. And I think that's why it's important to know the facts and the truth.
Yeah, I mean, saying this is Trump's victory totally legitimizes threatening nuclear war as a diplomacy tactic, and that's not that's not okay, and that's not what happened.
That's right. That's right. Jim, if you could put up some of the demonstration photos. I kind of wanted to. I didn't have too many, but I had videos. I had a video of you speaking. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah, this is the first one. We're just setting up there. I just wanted to. There were a number of signs that people would pick up later. But it was nice to see Stop the U.S. War Machine and Veterans for Peace flag, which I wanted to make sure we had out there. And the next photo. Now, this was, do you know who the Mike
Horner.
Mike Horner, He just basically put this all up and on his while we were there and made the ship. He was there the night before, I guess.
Yeah, he did a light projection on the actual ship, which is so cool.
I wish we had videos of that.
I know.
There's a still of it.
Yeah,
this is a still of it
that they posted that was fantastic.
1.6 billion. So that was out there. And this, of course, is we're getting ready to march. This is a number of us just getting there. And then there was a train that came by.
Yes.
It's as though I said, what is this, a conspiracy to stop us from going over to the ship where they were doing their ceremonies? And then next one. Now, you want to tell them what's happening here?
Yeah, so these are guys that are involved in the, quote, Patriot Prayer movement, and they were there to counter-protest us. There were only about 4 of them, so it was a pretty sad counter-protest. They're not very organized, which is good.
They were trying to be threatening, but they weren't very
It was
threatening.
really confusing. I think they were trying to confuse us because they kept like saying chants that they knew we had done at other protests.
Yeah.
Like this guy right here was trying to get us to say no Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA while we were chanting something else, which is like, what would he have accomplished if we had started chanting that?
He was also saying, you guys only have one chant.
Yeah.
What's wrong with
He's
you?
like,
Can you
"You
be more
sheep."
creative?
Yeah, he was so mad that we didn't change the chant.
And he kind of, I thought it was funny because he was just kind of standing there, and we kept moving forward.
Yeah.
When we got to the area where they had the cyclone fence, we were looking over, they wouldn't let us in. I mean, there was no
Right.
way we could even get in there to it. They pretty much locked us out. But him and this other guy were trying to stop us, and this one guy was basically getting in my face, saying, you know, what do you want to go through me?
Yeah.
And I just walked right through him.
Right.
You know, but
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, how brave.
Yeah.
How brave are these guys? Because they know, first of all, that we're a nonviolent, peaceful group, and we're not going to beat the
Yeah.
crap out of them, right?
Yeah, and the way that they like marketed their counter protest, because I was monitoring it on Facebook beforehand, was like, stop Antifa from storming the ship. Like they're like, we must protect the ship. Like they literally thought we were going to take the ship. And they had to go protect it from evil Antifa.
Oh, I wish we
In our dreams, right?
Yeah.
well, you know, and,
Are there more of those ships coming for a Rose Festival?
ooh, I don't know.
You know, that's
mean,
usually
Right.
Last year we had the Golden Rule that came to Portland during the Fleet Week, and the Golden Rule is a ship that went to the Marshall Islands to try and stop the nuclear testing. What was that? 58, and it was stopped in Hawaii, and the crew was arrested. And then another Quaker family in the Phoenix Rising, another ship actually went and did that, and so they were inspired by them. But the Golden Rule inspired the Greenpeace and other peace ships. And so eventually it went through a number of owners and then sunk off of Humboldt Bay. Veterans for Peace about 7 years ago found it in the bay, brought it up, redid it. Now it's a beautiful sailboat. They're getting ready to sail it to Hawaii and then to the Marshall Islands this June or July. And so its mission is to stop nuclear war and nuclear weapons and nuclear power, to talk about these issues and the contamination of our oceans, et cetera, and rivers. So they even sailed up the Columbia River and stopped at various places speaking with people, and they went up to Puget Sound and then back down to, they're in San Diego right now. So it's an incredible ship, and it's basically becoming a university of this information to be carried on and passed on from generation. There are children, I should say, grade school and high school kids that will go there, and they take them out sailing and educate them at the same time. And if they want to learn how to sail a little bit, they teach them a little bit. So, and this is pretty good. There was a lot of young minority kids that were going. So, and VFP is that's one of our major projects.
is the boat, is the ship.
It's a ship. Yeah. And so it's you can find that on our website and just look for the Golden Rule. It's pretty amazing. We'll bring it back up again, and so that's one thing I think is important. So instead of a warship, we have a peace ship.
That's cool.
That's pretty cool, isn't it? And both Okinawa and Jeju Island and Hawaii have all asked us to bring the ship there because they want to see that sail around those islands to codify the idea of those peace islands. And they want that to be some sort of peace summit that they will have there. So, Colonel Ann Wright, she's was in the military for a number of years, was a diplomat who who finally was in Pakistan, and when the Iraq War took place, she resigned, and she's become, an incredible activist around the world. Her and I were in Okinawa together, and while being there, she was talking about, we were being interviewed, and she was talking about military sexual trauma. Another thing to think about in people going into the military. And I was talking about Agent Orange. And it was interesting because while I was talking about Agent Orange, the guy that was interviewing us says, right down below here, here's this base right here they were digging up, we're giving back. They have Agent Orange down there. I said, what are you doing? I don't want to be near this stuff, He said, oh, this is nothing. We'll take you over to this other place. I think it was Okinawa City. And they had these barrels of Agent Orange and other chemicals that were stacked up high that were being dug up on this field or brought there as a place to dump. Well, they have a high school right next door, and it was a soccer field, and a grade school just down of our military, for our military. Plus, it's right in a city area, and the government, the Japanese are saying the U.S. needs to clean it up. The U.S. says, well, it's your country, we gave the base back to you, you have to clean it up. Nobody's cleaning it up, and the people are suffering in between. This is all of these things are just incredible. Yeah. I just wanted to raise a couple other issues. One thing coming up is going to be May Day. So are you preparing for May Day at all?
DSA is not officially co-sponsoring any event, but I know that there is an event happening in East Portland with a bunch of different groups focusing on immigrant rights,
right?
Which should be pretty good. And I'm not sure if Veterans for Peace is involved in that.
Yeah, we will be going. I haven't been actively involved in. I used to be, go to their planning meetings, but I'm always out there whenever I can. May Day's always been important. I've always been a labor activist.
I think it's at Lentz Park.
It is at Lentz Park.
And I think Jobs with Justice is certainly tabling.
Yeah, I grew up there. So when I was in grade school and first year of high school, I lived on 84th and Duke, and Lentz Park would be something that I'd go to. My dad was an immigrant Panamanian that was a bartender, and he was taking care of 6 kids, mostly on tips, till he bought a house. When an average working person could buy a house with 5 bedrooms, and in Laurelhurst district, and for $13,000. Can you imagine? I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that are happening to us. There's also I got a friend of mine sent me this, Know Your Rights, U.S. Imperialism and Demilitarization and Immigration on, they call it Black April, Sunday, April 29th. So this tomorrow at 1 to 3 p.m. in Other Words bookstore at 14 Northeast Killingsworth. So I just wanted to make that announcement. A good friend of mine is actively involved in that, Know Your Rights. They do a lot of training, and it's pretty important for people to know what they're getting into. Now we kind of want to go, and we'll talk about the save the veteran, save the the VA from privatization. If you could put up the pictures from the Inner City Blues Festival, that would be great.
While you were talking about the ships.
There's, we can say, Mike Crenshaw.
Yeah.
Mike Crenshaw is a hip-hop artist and a spoken word poet, and is, I think, a director of one of the shows for hip-hop on KBOO. He's been a KBOO manager there before. And Mike and I go back a long time. I founded an organization called Education Without Borders with my colleagues and friends that were from Somaliland. And Mike and other hip-hop artists would do these poetry slams. And they were just getting their stuff out and making, passing the hat. And they would give us half the hat just to give us some money as we're trying to collect books and send them to Somalia to some of the first schools in 1991 when the country became independent of all the destruction that was going on in Mogadishu. So Mike has been there. He is now the director of Pass the Torch. I was the director of, founder and director of Education Without Borders for so many years. A couple of years back, I passed the torch to Mike. Mike has also gone to Africa and done African hip hop tour and raising money for a school in Rwanda. And the school in Rwanda was to put the Tutsis and the Hutus together because of the massacre that took place. And they were building a peace school. The school now has computers and is actually self-sufficient. So they're starting to build a new school. And so that was, I mean, it was a great success. I'm glad to be a part of that. Then we have Education Without Borders also is involved with Books to Prisoners. And Alex Fish, who's been with them for a long time, is somebody who helps manage calling people together for the donation of books. Here we have Norman Sylvester. Norman Sylvester Review, his band, his daughter and other singers joined that band. But for me, Norman has been there for a number of years. Back in 1988, Ken Cropper and I were trying to think of a way to raise money for Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition at the time in his run for president. And so we'd gone to the board, and Ken is this aficionado of music, and he would take me to blues clubs here and there, and he says, well, why don't we do a blues thing? So we started trying to push that, and that people said, nah, we can't afford that. They were a little afraid, but he knew this guy named Jeff Parks that had the Cotton Club in North Portland and this sort of private club. So he talked him into it. He says, yeah, he'll support it. And so we got Norman Sylvester. We had Lloyd Jones and a guy named Ralph, I can't think of his name. I think Ralph Black, a jazz singer and blues singer, and a few other people. And we decided, you know, we'll pay out of our own pocket. I was working in the printing industry and I was a union activist there. So we had enough money to do it, but we were hoping to get reimbursed. And so we said, we'll put up the money. If you fail, we pay for the band. So we did that. And in fact, Norman was so good at getting all these other people to come and just donate their time that it turned out to be this huge group of musicians that came out and celebrated. And fun. Again, it was like it is now. It's like all of a sudden people were woke and they wanted to fight against what was happening in this country. So the musicians were putting their voices out there, and Norman has stayed with it all these years, and it's been the steady band that brings people together. And he's always doing something for healthcare or education, and I love the guy. I mean, he's just
so connected to the community.
He's connected.
He brings
to the community,
things
that's right.
together. Yeah.
So you want to tell them about what's coming up here?
Sure. So a number of organizations, really bottom-lined by AFGE, which is American Federation of Government Employees, my union up at the VA, is putting on a forum to really educate people about what's happening with the VA. And the bottom line, as Dan knows, is that there's a strong push to take this large, integrated, publicly funded healthcare system and really privatize it to death. And that push started a number of years ago. But with Trump and with some of the scandals that got publicity a few years ago, there's an increased push. And right now, the Koch brothers have a AstroTurf group called Concerned Veterans of America. It sounds like it's a true veterans service organization, but it has almost no people. And they are really pushing for privatization. So right now, the VA is essentially a socialized healthcare system. Against the media narrative, it provides excellent care. That when there's studies comparing private healthcare systems and the VA comes out surprisingly well.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that the media doesn't get is that veterans largely support maintaining and improving the VA rather than tearing it apart.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just read what's in the media, you wouldn't know that. So the main idea of this forum is to really let people know about the good work that the VA does and why we need to preserve it. A second piece of this work has to do with the fact that the first step of privatization has to do with union busting at the VA.
That's right.
So what happens is the VA is underfunded, understaffed. There's tens of thousands of vacancies around the country. And then there are waiting lists. Then there are complaints. And the answer from really not just Trump, but pushes in Congress also are, well, see, public system can't work right. We have to get something more efficient. We have to privatize it. And so there have already been reductions in union protections. There's been union busting. They've gotten rid of a lot of appeal rights under the rubric of accountability. And instead, they passed a law last year called the VA Accountability Bill and whistleblower protection, which was supposed to be able to get rid of bad managers.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's bad managers, let's move things along. Instead, they've hardly gotten rid of any managers. They're getting rid of very low-level people by reducing their appeal rights, reducing what's called progressive discipline, where if you do something wrong, well, you should get counseled and given 90 days or 6 months to improve. Instead, it's already started being a very difficult place for workers. So this event is bringing Suzanne Gordon, who's a great writer and researcher.
This is the book here.
And I'm so excited to meet her.
This is the, did you catch that?
She
you
is a healthcare journalist, not a nurse, but she has written about nursing for years, and I'm a nurse practitioner. But she studied the VA for about 3 years and wrote this book, which really talks about all these wonderful things that the VA does, that the public and often the people who, like me, who worked at the VA, didn't know about.
And this is the battle for veterans health care, the dispatches from the front lines of policy making and patient care by Suzanne Gordon.
Yeah.
And I've read, you should see my book, it's all underlined. I've got almost every page underlined. It's so much information.
So I was handed that book by Ian Hoffman, who's a AFGE national organizer, when we were back in DC for legislative visits. And I read the whole thing by the time I got back to Portland. But one of the interesting things about this event is it's part of a national campaign that's bringing union activists together with Veterans for Peace, veterans advocates, and other community groups, including healthcare advocates.
That's right.
And it's really a coalition that hasn't existed before, that I think is very promising. And it also reminds me of the campaigns that the teachers have done. The teachers often say, when they're on strike or about to go on strike, teachers' working conditions our students' learning conditions. And it's the same thing for clinicians and people who work at the VA. The veterans workers, the workers at the VA, when their working conditions are decent, they can provide good care. When there's vacancies, when they're understaffed, you can't provide good care. So when we come together, I'm hoping that we'll be able to make some changes, including changes in some of these laws, because even the Democrats voted for the two bills. One was this accountability bill, which reduced union protections, but the other bill back in 2014 was called Choice, and it really had to do with much increased privatization.
Farming out veterans' health care to the outside private sector.
Yeah, and there's even things happening now with hedge fund people wanting to start mental health for veterans businesses and have VA money go to outsource to them. So it's an active, the right wing wants those patients and they want to make profit off of them. And if we don't work pretty hard, it's going to happen.
Right. And in fact, you know, I mean, I was just up at the VA. I had to go in with my CPAC for a sleep clinic, you know. And just about a week before that, I was there for MRI. For I've been having these headaches and worried about, you know, possible tumor. Anything could happen because I've never get headaches. And with being an Agent Orange exposed veteran, I have to worry about a lot of those things. And then I've been having more problem with my feet lately, and I can't walk as far. I mean, even when we marched down, I was in pain, and by the end I came there. And I never used to have that problem at all, and this is only recent, but it's, the doctor said, he said it could actually be my back. So he had the MRI do my back. Now, in the private world, that would not happen. I couldn't afford it, for one thing. And the insurance companies would say, it's nothing, you know, you're just getting old. These are the kinds of things that happen. The VA is so important to me in my life. I remember when I first came home from Viet Nam, I mean, I didn't want anything to do with the VA, with anybody, and I had to go to the VA for something. My first time going there, and I was so embarrassed at that time. I was very angry. There was, like, they were with OSHU, and they had a door open, and the guy was checking my prostate, and the door was wide open, and people walking by, and I was embarrassed, you know. I didn't know. I would not go back for years and years and years. And it wasn't until 2004, I think, I started realizing I had to start doing something. And in 2008, I actually applied for benefits because my post-traumatic stress went up, actually went up at 9/11. And I was still in denial, but my other veterans friends were saying, no, you need to go get help. And so I go for therapy, and at the same time, once a month I go for therapy. And that just to release the valve. And then when you have a health problem, that increases your tension and your despair and stuff. And people don't realize that the VA has some of the best mental health facilities and research in the country, working with other organizations and other hospitals. They also train more doctors and nurses than any other hospital in the country. But what do you know? I mean, there are a lot of people that could probably survive in some form under a different kind of insurance. It costs me money, but at the same time, but what happens to those that are severely disabled? Those that lost their legs and arms and been their brains have been half blown away, have BTI, you know, brain injuries. These things are just, this is incredible stuff that you would just be abandoning these people. So disabled veterans is another group that's very strongly opposed to these privatization efforts. And I think, when I was at the VA, I was talking to this guy. I says, I'm working to save the VA from privatization. I like to drop off flyers in different places. And the guy goes, it'll never happen. That's the problem.
The privatization will never happen?
That's what he was saying, yeah. That's the problem. When people just believe that they're comfortable with what they have, they just don't think it's possible to have. Well, VA healthcare will continue, but it will be harmed out, and they'll pay people more money, cost more money and we won't have our drugs will go way up also. The pharmaceutical companies and the private hospitals want to get us. It's not about our health care. It's turning us into commodities that they can make money on. And that just is a crime to me.
Part of the narrative that's happening now is this argument. You can see it in the New York Times. We don't want to privatize the VA. It's just when, we don't have the specialist or somebody lives too far away. And the definition of privatization is different. So the right-wingers are saying, no, we don't want to privatize because we're going to leave the VA, the shell of the VA, standing. But what they're really doing is privatizing bit by bit by bit. It's like carving it out like a Swiss cheese until there's almost nothing left, as opposed to trying to do the media work that would allow them to, as a whole, privatize this agency. You can't do that. What you do is you undermine the agency and then privatize pieces of it.
That's right.
And that's what's already happening.
And in some states, in fact, there's been some corruption with the local politicians that work to undermine and sabotage the VA, and they use that as the news media to say, look at how the VA is not taking care of these people. And, there's been a lot of correction by the VA. There have been problems, but they'll
Absolutely.
say these waiting things. I have never waited any longer than I ever did in the private sector.
And the studies that were done about in 2015, 2016 said that the waiting periods were very similar to private health care. No one is saying that there aren't important places for the VA to improve. And Portland's VA, I think, is recognized as an excellent one.
Yeah, it is. In San Francisco.
There's understaffing, there's things that are happening that shouldn't happen, there's under-resourcing, but it's a system that exists that can be improved as opposed to undermined.
We also have, veterans are a grouchy group, especially some of our old World War II and Viet Nam veterans, and even the young guys. Because they've been through a lot, and they can get pissed off really quick on stuff, and they get, they'll complain about anything that didn't happen right away, and so if the media picks up on that, it sounds like those guys will not give up their VA. They rely upon it. But that doesn't mean they don't complain. They complain like crazy. And so that's one thing I think you have to also take into consideration.
And no system is going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
But as a whole, the VA does a good job and needs to be protected.
I also knew somebody who was constantly coming to me about we should do something about some management because basically he wasn't getting his opioids. And it was an addiction, and it's sad, but, I think he's okay now because he had to get through that period of time. But, the VA is coming down pretty hard and trying to find healthier ways for people to deal with pain.
Right.
Now, it's still available, but it's up to the doctor to decide,
Yeah.
It's also kind of amazing to look at these contrasting narratives about healthcare when you talk about the VA has these problems, not everyone, but the narrative in the media is we have to privatize the VA versus, people are dying because they don't have medical insurance, private insurance. People are funding their healthcare on GoFundMe. But the narrative for private healthcare is it's fine, we should keep doing this system. It just shows the hook that the ruling class has on the media they control the narrative.
Absolutely.
And there's
Absolutely.
also
Thank you for that.
Yeah, there's also the there's another narrative too. Progressive people say, well, we could solve that problem if we just have a national health care plan, and ignore the destruction of the VA.
Mm-hmm.
They say, well, that can go away, and we'll, we'll have. It sounds great,
Mm-hmm.
but the VA is a specialized system, and it's the model
Mm-hmm.
for a national health care system. If they destroy this model, it's going to be a long time before there's going to be a single-payer healthcare system.
Right.
So we're working together, and that's the great thing about, when we were at the Inner City Blues Festival, is healthcare for all. That's what it was funding. That was what it was all about. And Veterans Peace we had a table there. So we had this literature out there so that we had that available for people to realize these are the issues. And people were signing up, they wanted to know more. But both unions and average workers, whether they're a union or not, just want to know what's going on. And the people want a system that's fair to everybody. And that's what we would like to see, is something that's fair to everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I had to ask you something I didn't ask, is how did you get into nursing? Where are you from originally?
Oh, this is a very long story, so I'm going to make it short. Nursing was a second career for me.
Pardon me?
Nursing was a
Okay.
second career for me. I'm originally from Connecticut, but I've lived in Portland off and on since 1968. So for a pretty long time. I became a nurse practitioner, and I worked in family practice clinics. I worked briefly for Multnomah County Health Department. I worked in New York City. And then in 2000, I ended up at the VA. I didn't want to go there, but I was offered, there was an open position, and I asked people I knew who all said, oh, the VA is great. And it was such a great fit that I stayed there. I don't know if that answers.
No, it does. I mean, I think
but-
it's good for people to kind of get a feel where people come from
Yeah,
and how they get involved.
So I had worked mostly with women's health and young kids, family practice before I got to the VA. But I really, it just was such a good fit working in
Well,
that system and with veterans.
Well, we're coming to the
Yeah.
end of the program, and I want to thank both of you so much for coming on the program. It was such short notice, and I was afraid I was going to have to do the program all by myself.
I'm sure it still would have been great.
I could have done it, but I would have had to find that video, which I did not have. So I want to thank you.